Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast Live. I'm your host, John Dehlin. It is August 30th, 2017, and I am so excited for today's interview. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Shawn Carter, and Shawn's been a listener for many years now. He's been a dear friend. He's actually appeared on Mormon Stories podcast at least once or twice as a panelist, but he's a great guy. Just to give you a little bit of background about Shawn, we're going to do some announcements, but before we do, I'll just tell you what this interview is going to be about. Shawn was raised in Los Angeles in the Compton area. He attended Harvard Law School, and at some point in his crazy journey, he does identify as a black man, and during his journey in life, after law school, he joined the LDS Church. And oddly enough, we'll get into this, but I think he listened to Mormon Stories podcast before he joined the church. He's been a member since 2011, and so he's been able to sort of experience modern Mormonism as a black man. And so we're going to be talking about race, which is always an important and sometimes a volatile issue to discuss. But in addition, we're going to talk about, in his words, how white supremacy led him out of Mormonism. So he's going to be sharing with us his experiences as a black man in the LDS Church and what he's experienced culturally. And we will be talking about the recent alt-right blogging from that white supremacist mommy blogger. But we're also just going to be talking about race in the LDS Church generally, along with other progressive type issues. And we want to invite anyone who's interested in issues of race, political correctness, etc., to join us on this conversation because it's going to be fascinating. Before we actually dive into our interview, I have a few announcements I'd like to quickly make. I'll make them really quick. Please, if you want to support Mormon Stories, please like the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page. That would help. It would also help if you gave us a positive review on the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page. Please go to iTunes and log in and give Mormon Stories Podcast a favorable review there. That is really useful. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter. So please follow us on social media. We have several events coming up. I'll be quick. September 14th and 15th will be in Seattle, Washington. October 20th through 22nd will be in Sydney, Australia. November 9th through 10th will be in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we're accepting nominations for 2018 events. We already have a cruise scheduled for October 24th through 28th, 2018. But we're accepting nominations for workshops and retreats around the world. So if you want to bring an event to your area, email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. And we'd love to consider coming to your area. So that is all our introductions. And now we are ready to welcome Shawn Carter to his first solo Mormon Stories interview. Shawn Carter, welcome to Mormon Stories Podcast. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. This is a dream come true, buddy. And you can tell I don't dream big, but I'm excited.
Yeah, you got to aim higher. But it's worth mentioning that you're a humorist. Tell us what that means to be a humorist and what you do for a living.
So in a nutshell, I tell jokes to lawyers for a living.
Okay.
And lawyers have conferences just like you do with the Mormon. They're like Mormons, right? The conferences all the time. And they have legal ethics requirements and other very, very boring topics. And if you can make those topics at all interesting, all right, then people will give you money. And so that's what I do. I run around the country and I tell, stories and jokes to lawyers about legal topics, right? I'm not just, you doing stand-up comedy and people pay me money. And that's actually, we'll talk about in a minute, but how I found the church through my travels as a humorist.
Okay, cool. Well, that's not your everyday Mormon story, is it?
No. And, I guess if we started my Mormon story, that definitely didn't start with 20 generations of pioneer stock. I guess I was inaugural pioneer stock. I never even really knew a Mormon. I knew one in high school. And all I knew about Mormons then was that you couldn't, and this is what I knew two things about Mormonism, both untrue, that you couldn't have caffeine and that you couldn't have sex. And neither, so I had no interest in either one of those things. And so I didn't really know much about Mormonism at all.
Let's back up just a tiny bit. Did you, so were you raised in a biracial home? Were both your parents Black? Tell us just about,
okay.
And tell us about, did you have siblings? And what was it like to grow up in Compton, by the way?
Exactly. So I am straight out of Compton, and it literally is on my birth certificate, if I could find it. It says, but in fairness, that's always the good story, right? It gives me the street cred, right? But we moved out of Compton when I was 5 or 6 years old to the next suburb over. We were Compton adjacent. And so this is a fairly largely lower middle class African-American community. But in school, I was often bussed out to the suburbs to go to school with white kids. And so, most of my time I spent from junior high school up in being a minority in a majority community. I happened to test well and do fairly well in school. So I got to go to Brown University, and then I got to go to Harvard Law School. And I was there coincidentally with President Barack Obama. That has nothing to do with this story, but I like to get it out there at some point because it's really all I got going for me, John. It really is my proudest accomplishment so far is that I was on the campus with this guy for 2 years. And after law school, I went and practiced law, have a Mormon connection there.
Okay, wait, you're going so fast.
Sorry about that.
Your parents, were they from the Los Angeles area? Where were they from?
Okay, so my parents are from, boy, it's funny, I thought we got to go negative story. So my parents are from, my father's originally from Winter Haven, Florida, which is very near like where they did the movie Rosewood. It's Florida, but it's not cosmopolitan progressive Florida. It's northern, middle Florida, which is much more like Alabama. So my father's from there originally, but when he was 5 or 6, his mother, my grandmother, very brave woman, took her 2 kids by herself, went across the country to California to start a new life. My mother was born in a place called Henderson, North Carolina, near Raleigh-Durham. And when she was, a young woman, she also moved to Southern California. And so they met there, when they were 19 or 20. And got married.
So both your parents went to high school in the LA area, is that right?
Exactly.
And would they have? So just to be clear, are they both? Do they identify as Black? Are they biracial?
Oh yeah. They're both super Black.
Okay.
And I mean in the sense that there are white people in our family somewhere. We tend to deny it. If you ask us why some of us will have straight hair or lighter skin tones, we'll tell you it's because we're part Indian, just like white people do. We're lying, but there are white people in our family as well. But for the most part, we identify Black up to 3 or 4 generations back. So we're pretty unanimously Black.
Okay. And did your parents? Did they grow up? Did they go to college? Or are you a first generation college student? Did they grow up middle class? Did they grow up non-middle class? How would you describe their upbringing?
Exactly. So they both grew up, somewhat like my mother grew up rurally poor, where they didn't even have plumbing until she was like in high school.
In LA?
No, in North Carolina.
Okay.
My father grew up in LA, but in Compton. He was raised in Compton, went to Compton High School. And so but Compton at the time wasn't what it is now. He said, for instance, his high school was partly white when he was there in the 60s, in the early 60s. Right. So, but they were, when they got married, they were high school grads. They were both in community college. My dad went to Vietnam. After I was born. Okay. So that, and then when he came back, he went to school on the GI Bill, got his, so it's kind of almost like a white Mormon story. And since that he got his, so both of my parents are college grads, but they got their college diplomas around the time where I got mine. right? They worked their way through school, and so my
Wow.
father got his, college. I think college degree. Sometime I was in maybe junior high school or high school. Actually, my mom got hers, I guess, when I was like graduating from high school. So they, worked their way through. They did, well. They moved from, poor to lower middle class to firmly middle class. They ended up, in a suburb, very nice suburb of Southern California.
What's it
um,
called? What's the suburb called?
Chino Hills.
Okay. And what were their professions? Did they both work?
Exactly. So they both worked. My father was a social worker. Worked his whole career in various aspects of social work for the state of California. My mother was one of AT&T's first computer programmers.
Nice.
Kind of one of these hidden figures things, right? But no college degree, because back then, you just needed to be able to punch those cards. And so, but she, very, very smart lady. Is worked for several years. Now I think she does insurance claims adjustment, but still works. And very, they did very well.
How many siblings?
So I have one younger sister.
Okay.
She's 8 years younger, but because she's 8 years younger, we basically had two only childhoods.
So were you religious at all as a family growing up?
It's funny. We were what we call CME Christians. CME Christians mean Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter.
Okay.
Which, by the way, is the largest denomination of Christianity by far. It really is. My mother was a believer, and she would go to various churches, but she was, very, generic. She wasn't brand loyal. She might be a member of the choir of the Baptist church, but if the Lutherans came along and had a nicer choir, we went to Lutheran church. My father didn't go usually. And so that allowed us as kids to pick and choose. You have to stay home, take care of daddy. You don't want to leave daddy by himself. And so as a kid, I probably missed Sunday most of the time. But every once in a while, my mother would drag us to church as well.
Okay. So occasional church attending, mostly to Christian churches. But,
absolutely.
Did you talk about, were you well accepted in your, middle and high school? Did you experience discrimination? Or were you popular? Like, what was that? Or both? What was that like?
No. No funny people were ever class president or really accepted. You get funny because you have to find some other way to make people like you, right? So I was not an athlete or particularly good looking. I got good looking later. All right, but I was in high school, and so I was always lucky to have a good group of friends. And so I had a good group of friends, and it was helpful because, for instance, my best friend in high school graduated from MIT, right? And so I was kind of in a nerdy group, but on the other hand, he was also star of the basketball team, right? And so, I was middle. I was in the middle. People would have, known me, but they wouldn't have necessarily, liked me. Couldn't date a cheerleader.
Right.
That kind of thing. But and my high school was weird in the sense that it wasn't this way, but I remember it being 1/4 black, 1/4 white, 1/4 Latino, and like 1/4 Asian. The numbers are probably off, but we had a lot of diversity. And when you have that much diversity, it's really hard to, you can't, as the black people can't fight everybody, right? And no group was really, such a large majority that there was any group that was on the outs. And so people really got along in ways. If you would have asked me back then, I would have said, what are you talking about? We're post-racial. We're past that. As in our high school, I really never noticed anything that, now I probably missed it, but I didn't notice anything that struck of any type of discrimination. People seem to really get along well, surprisingly, much better than 2017.
Okay, so you didn't have this sense of always being picked on or mistreated or marginalized.
No. And to give you an example, when I went to Brown as an undergrad, I was a Republican. And we tried to start a Young Republican chapter. That's how backwards I was. I think it's also rebellion. And my parents are longtime Democrats. You want to rebel, if your parents are liberal, you got to go conservative, right?
So I'm going to ask you my first of probably many offensive questions, not intending to be offensive, but what if someone were to say, well, you were assimilated into white culture. You weren't really black. You got educated and maybe you looked and spoke or dressed a lot like your peers. How would you respond to sort of that idea of assimilation versus bringing some sort of, culture with you?
Right.
And tell me if that's just an inappropriate question.
No, not at all. And it was in doing wrong. I think part of it was there was a goal to assimilate, to and in the sense that I'll give you an example. I definitely, when I went to high school, for instance, I remember I was thinking about recently. My favorite artist in high school was Adam Ant.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right, yeah, well, most of you remember.
Goody two shoes.
There you go, right? Don't drink, don't smoke. What do you do, right? Yeah, Mormons would love that. I forgot about that. But you can imagine, and some of your younger listeners have to Google that. But there was like I listened to the music of my white peers. And it wasn't, like you said, but here's where I can tell you there was some difference. I'm glad you mentioned it. I kind of glossed over it. But I always knew that there was some difference. So a perfect example is the talk that most fathers have with their children. When you get a license, dad sits you down and says, look, if you get pulled over by the police, you need to make sure that you keep your hands visible, that you talk very slowly and deliberately to the officer, that it's yes, sir, no, sir. I didn't even keep my, by the way, registration in the glove compartment because that's a closed compartment, et cetera. You put it over on the what is that, the thing you pull down, whatever, the sunshade, so that you have it handy, possible to keep your license in your front pocket. I began to notice that in the sense that when I did get pulled over and it would happen, I had a very deliberate routine and script. I got a job once in the summer, and I would drive from my home in this Compton adjacent area to Los Angeles. I get pulled over a couple of times at night, and I made sure that I wore my aerospace badge with me when I got in the car.
Yeah.
There was a way to let people know, like you said, I'm not that kind of black guy, was the thought. All right. I gotta let you know immediately that, that I'm someone that people might miss. All right. And so I knew that. So it wasn't the kind of thing where I grew up thinking, oh, no, we're all the same. I knew that there was something different about me.
And what would that have been like as a kid to be black, to identify as black, and to sort of maybe even be taught that there's two types of black people and you don't want to be that type, you want to be this type. Is that fair? Am I characterizing that?
No, absolutely right. Or at least you want to give the impression, right, that, when someone sees you, and that's, by the way,
are you ashamed of that now? I
am now, but it took me a long time. I mean, like the last 5 years or so to really realize how messed up that was, because basically what I was doing was, what we were all doing was trying to find a way to sort of exempt ourselves out of blackness, to get, our white card. Say, okay, you know what? Yeah, those black people will still be mistreated, et cetera, and we're not going to fix that problem. We'll just make sure that stuff is okay for us.
Yeah, and that's where my questions were kind of trying to go. Absolutely. I watched this forgive this just sidebar. I watched this amazing documentary called O.J. Simpson Made in America. And it talked about, ironically, of course, he came up in the LA area in the 60s. And there are these scenes where all the civil rights stuff is happening, of course, with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all this stuff all over the country, race riots in Compton. And people are trying to drag OJ into this dialogue. And from very early in his career, he would say, I'm not black or white, I'm OJ. And it was his way of trying to just avoid that whole mess.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, Los Angeles was so controversial as an area where there was a lot of police brutality, a lot of people of color would be killed, a lot of race riots in the 60s and 70s. And so you were growing up in a very racially charged area, and you were trying to distance yourself from your blackness, just like O.J. Simpson was doing. And that must be something very hard or difficult to look back on now as an adult.
Yeah, no, well, it is, except for the fact, I'm very pretty good about forgiving me. So I've gotten over me. I've told myself, and we kind of, worked it out with me. But anyway, I try to do a lot of work in diversity now to really kind of, earn. I said recently to earn back my black card, because I really, and I wasn't as bad as OJ in the sense that if you'd asked me about it explicitly, I might not have said anything. But internally, you just try to work your. And don't get me wrong, I still do that to the extent that I think it will keep me safe. So, for instance, the last 3 times I've been pulled over in my travels, I've been pulled over in, one time I'm pulled over in Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri. I'm speeding through some speed trap. The officer pulls me over, and I immediately played my white card. He said, "Why are you going so fast?" I said, "I'm going to speak to a group of lawyers and judges in the morning. It's late. I was just trying to get there. I'm giving the keynote first thing in the morning." I don't get a ticket. I don't get pulled out of the car. I could have got a police escort if I wanted one, because this guy, I made him understand. I made him understand immediately, if I turn up missing, somebody's going to come looking for me. And your boss is going to answer their call when they come looking for me, and then they're going to come to you and want to know what happened to this guy. But you're right. I mean, it is a kind of a, don't, and I probably wouldn't even be awoke to that now, except for the fact that I have sons, 23-year-old, my oldest son, teenage sons, and they don't have a white card. All right, they didn't go to school with the president. They don't have an ability to be able to distinguish themselves immediately from the stereotype. And so I realized, we've got to fix this for everybody, because everybody doesn't have a card.
Did you have heroes growing up? You talked about Adam Ant as a musician,
Right.
like actors or civil rights heroes or historical figures. Were they white characters? Were they black? Talk about who you looked up to as a kid.
That's an interesting question. It would have been mostly just like any other idiot 17-year-old. My hero, the person I probably most admired was Prince. Love me some Prince. I'm gonna admit this because can't be more than a few thousand of us watching it now. But I went to a high school dance with the entire Prince ensemble. I had the ruffle shirt and the eye makeup.
The Jheri curl?
I could not. My parents would see. My parents would kind of fit into this. Like, they would never let me get a Jheri curl. I wanted Jheri curl. I wanted to mess up all of our pillowcases, and they just would not let me do it. They want to make sure that I could survive that police stop. So from my parents were like that. For instance, I didn't go to school with a cardigan sweater every day, but I couldn't have gone to school, wearing anything that looked particularly ethnic either. I tried to walk out of. I remember even back then, it wasn't as big back then, but I remember one time I tried to walk out of the house without a belt, and I got a belt. That kind of thing. So, but my heroes were, like I said, sports and athletic heroes. I wasn't, I had the kind of obligatory respect for Dr. King. The respect that everybody has for Dr. King throughout society, which is simply that he's a great guy. He got a holiday. We love him, but we don't really listen to anything he said other than that one speech, that one part of that one speech. And so I didn't really have an appreciation like I do now for Dr. King.
So you didn't grow up feeling deeply connected to the civil rights movement?
No, it was past that. We're done.
Yeah.
Victories have been won. I got to go to good schools. We're done. We're past this.
Interesting. Did you like Magic Johnson?
Oh, are you kidding me? Loved Magic Johnson.
More than Larry Bird, because that was its own. A little that had its own racial undertones, right?
Well, and that always, that afternoon, I was thinking about it in the context of last weekend's big boxing match, and sort of bringing back that whole, Great White Hope thing. That is when blackness probably most affected me, is with sports. There was a big controversy when I was growing up was with having a black quarterback. And at one point, the Rams had a black quarterback named James Harris, and they replaced him with Pat Hayton, who is if you could basically, he was whiteness. He was Mr. White America. Rhodes Scholar, blonde hair. He could have been a Mormon. And as a result, he would have been general authority. I mean, he was just Mr. White America. And there was a big controversy between the two of them, and it became such a big deal racially. So you go to the barbershop and you hear about, how the black man's being held down. And even if you're 7, you don't really understand the dynamics, but you know that there's my team and their team, at least with regard to, sports and other things. But the thought really is that I did not think in 2017 that I would ever be anywhere talking about race.
right.
We were past that.
You felt you were in a past race,
Post-racial,
you're a
absolutely.
post-racial society. That's what you thought as a high school kid.
Yeah, Dr. King had fixed all that.
Okay. So you went to Brown University. That's an elite, Ivy League school, right?
It is.
And what'd you study?
I studied computer science.
Was there
Yeah, I know.
was there anything in your high school or early college years that you think is worth mentioning as it relates to your faith journey with Mormonism? Any stories or
No,
spiritual experiences or
no
church?
Mormons in college. No, 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 no.
What
I mean,
about
they might
spiritual?
have been, but I wouldn't have known them. Well,
What
yeah,
about spiritual experiences or any of that stuff?
no, no, no.
Okay.
Please, I just college. What's wrong with you?
So you were just living the dream. You graduate from high school, to do well, go to Ivy League schools, study computer science. That's crazy.
Well, my parents wanted me to make sure I can get a job. So
Yeah,
the
yeah,
thought all along was to go to law school. But if you get derailed, I don't want you to come back here, and live in my basement, right?
right.
California didn't have basements, so I had to live on the first floor with them. And they were like, we don't want you, we spent every dime we had, mortgage our house twice to send you there. You should at least be able to, pay your own mortgage when you get out. And I'm glad they actually gave me that background. But then I went to law school right from college to law school. I guess something happened in the meantime. I met my wife as a senior in college. We dated all through law school. We got married 2 days after law school. So even though I didn't have a spiritual experience, I was kind of being Mormon-y, right? I got married to my college sweetheart, and then started practicing law.
Okay. And during this time, did you meet any Mormons at law school that were of note?
No, I can't think of one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. There had to be one, so maybe they were keeping on a down low. I'm imagining that. And when you think about it, it's not like you have, So if it's not like I could tell.
Right.
Um,
So you graduated high school in what year?
in 85,
You graduated high school.
high
So
school
you're
85.
50. You're 2 years older than
I
me.
will be 50 in 3 weeks.
Okay. All right. So we came about the same time. All right. So you graduate law school, start practicing law. How in the world did you, as a black man, successful, educated, end up joining Mormonism?
It's crazy, right?
It seems crazy.
It is. And so what happens is my first real experiences come through traveling the country telling jokes to lawyers. I got hired by the Utah Bar. One of my first state bar clients, they brought me up to do an annual meeting in Sun Valley, Idaho. And brought my family with me, and it was something different about the Utah Bar in the sense that it was family. They brought family, so I paid to bring my whole family up. People were very kind, and I started doing work for the Utah Bar Association, and then BYU called and said, "Can you come and do an alumni weekend for us? We want you to give a presentation at the law school. We bring our alums back. They get their continuing education credits." And someone saw you and think you'd be fun, and I knew nothing at all about Mormons or BYU, but I say, hey, it paid money, I'm going. And the thing that struck me at BYU was, now, by the way, I should go back. I had no spiritual experiences in high school, college, etc. But as I got to be an adult and in my early 40s, I did find the Lord, so to speak. And so I became somewhat very passionate about evangelical, non-denominational, Joel Osteen, name it, claim it, grab it, blab it, spin around 3 times and you get a new Lexus type of Christianity.
Okay.
And I thought my job as run around as a traveling speaker was to give sermonars, right? And so I would always try to have these messages. My titles would be things like, thou shalt not lie, cheat, and steal, the 10 commandments of legal ethics. Sue unto others as you'd have them sue unto you, right? And I would go almost as far as an altar call at the end, right? At the end of a presentation, I would say, look, everything I told you to do is hard to do, and you can't do it by yourself. You need a relationship, and the relationship you need to have, and I don't want to offend anyone, but the thing you need to know leaving here is just one thing. I'm available to do your other events. And they would all breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh my God, I thought he was going to say Jesus. And people would say to me, wow, you should be a preacher. And I'm like, I have a church, I'm doing my thing. And so I'm trying to, to preach these Christian principles surreptitiously through jokes. And I come to BYU and so we're good. I'm on the same page. You guys are, that different. I don't know anything about Mormonism, so I can't be prejudiced. Right?
So you didn't know about the Black Priesthood ban and that stuff?
Not only that, I didn't know about Joseph Smith, about the Book of Mormon. I just thought you were a different denomination, just like, Lutherans.
Okay.
All right. And so it never, but the thing that got me is I'm looking for a church for my wife. She's not a believer. She doesn't go to church. And matter of fact, when I first told her I was going to church, she was like, I think I should handle the checkbook from now on. Because she is, if you think, I had a good education. My wife went to a high school that is perennially, the country's #1 school for girls that she went to when she was like sixth grade. Very, very educated, woman, very smart woman. And so the idea that either one of us would start believing in this Jesus myth, right? It was nuts to her. And so she's not really on board with the Christianity. I keep trying to drag her to various churches. She's not interested. And something happens at the BYU Law School, which ties into race, interestingly enough. Whenever I go to one of these places, they have a chaperone. You can't trust me by myself. They don't know what I'll do. I'll eat the plastic fruit, or they don't know what I'll do. So they have someone who sort of handles me and takes me around, make sure I get to where I'm supposed to get to. And so my handler is showing me around the BYU Law School. Now, BYU Law School is very young. I think it started in like the 70s.
Yeah, that's right.
So they have pictures of every graduating class. And so we're walking and looking at the pictures. Now, you can imagine not a lot of brothers in the BYU pictures, all right? And I didn't expect to see any. So I was surprised that they had some Polynesians. At least they had a few of those. But what got me was there were no women. And I was like, wait a minute. How are there no women, especially in the 70s, 80s, 4 women, now? And I'm like, how are there no women? In most law schools from the last 30 years, women have made about half of the classes. How are there no women here? And he explained to me, he said, well, you go to law school, you're 23, 24, 25. Most of our women at that point are having young children. It's not a good time for law school. And I was like, wait a minute, why would that be the case? And he was like, well, we have these standards, that we believe in upholding, and so we tend to get married earlier. And I was blown away. And here's why I was blown away is because as a non-denominational Christian, we had those same standards, all right? But that never stopped anybody's activity and behavior, right? You wouldn't base your whole society on this, the chastity standard isn't unique to Mormonism, but you guys were taking it seriously. And so let me see how much of this rest of this book they take seriously. And so I go to my wife, I say, will you try Mormonism? And she says, I'll try it, but you go first. So the first Sunday of January 2011, I show up, go on the website, find out where the wards meet, and I go to this ward uninvited.
What city were you living in?
Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
Where I live now. And so I go to Mesa, Arizona, and Mesa is not the most diverse place, and my area is particularly non-diverse. And so they're pretty sure that I'm a visitor. Right? Nobody recognizes me. And also I didn't realize at the time that, you wouldn't know even if a white person was a visitor. If you don't know them, right, then,
yeah.
But I couldn't sneak in there. And so as soon as someone sees me, he basically kicks his wife in the forehead, sits me down next to him, opens the hymnal books for me, helps me find all the songs, just really kind, shows me where I'm supposed to go next. I do the full 3-hour block, uninvited. I do the whole thing, and I'm intrigued. I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Now, my challenge is my wife. I don't know how I'm going to get her.
Wait. How much of this was spiritual longing versus longing for community versus just being impressed with the ethics or the culture? Wanting something for your kids? Like, what was the drive? What were you longing for?
The drive here was to pull a long con on my wife. And it sounds funny, but here's what I mean by this. I want her to experience this Jesus thing. I don't think that my church then, Baptist church, had a monopoly on it. I think everybody, a lot of people have Jesus. I think the Mormons have at least their version of it. And I figured that if I could get her tied into, the spirit, I could pull her out of Mormonism, because Mormonism had something that she didn't want: the word of wisdom. All right. At the time, she smoked cigarettes, drank alcohol, drank wine in the evenings. She's not going to want to give up her babies, all right, for this crazy Mormonism. So if I can get her involved enough in the church, eventually I can say, hey, you know what, baby, we can have all the Jesus and the liquor and alcohol. Let's just go over here. And so the thought wasn't necessarily, it wasn't as thought out as that, but I really kind of thought I could kind of get, see, for her to see good, wonderful Christians and then say, hey, I can find good, wonderful Christians over here and keep my vices. And so so I go to the church and I like it. And I remember at the time, I'm not thinking that there was anything different between Mormonism and, and being a Lutheran, Episcopalian. It's another, branch of Protestantism. So I start doing my own investigating. And so I go into church the first time. I say, okay, fine. They say, what do you do? I say, look, I'm easy. All right. I'll take another bath. I need one anyway. That's fine. But you got to get my wife. And here's what you got to do. You're going to have to work with her. And so we sick the Mormon missionaries on her. Now, that made a lot of sense, except for the problem. The problem is this, though, is that, and it's good, Mormon missionaries are rude, which is necessary because they don't call before they come by all the time. Which is great, because if you call my wife, you're not getting in, right? You got to trick her in. The house is not going to be neat enough. We got 4 young kids, right? The house is not going to be neat enough in her mind. She's never going to let you in unless you show up at the front door. And so I'm on the road traveling all over the place, and these young women are coming by. They're offering their help. We've got neighbors coming by. One time, for instance, because remember, everyone's trying to, get us in the church now. I'm on the road, and somebody comes by and changes our smoke detectors because they heard a beep. That type of thing, right? The practical love bombing. And so my wife is like, oh, this is great. I'm, on the other hand, while all this is happening, I'm investigating Mormonism through the internet. And I'm finding all the stuff that you talked about, in Mormon stories, 100 through 250, right? And then I find the Mormon stories. I'm listening to stories, expressions, matters, Mormon memorabilia. If the infants were there, I would have listened to them. I'm listening to all, the whole apostasy lineup, right? And so I'm learning all of these things, which makes me think, okay, I don't want to necessarily join. I don't think the church is true, but my wife is really loving this stuff. And I'm a wonderful man. And so my con hasn't worked. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get in the water with you. It's a family religion. We'll do this together. And so she and
now,
I get
maybe you've said this already. Is your wife, does she identify as black? Or?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, my wife is black. We have 4 children. 3 of them are black. We'll worry about Devin later. But we'll get him tested. But I live in a predominantly black family. All right, it's all black all the way around.
And so she had not heard about the church's racist past.
And that's the thing is, I think here's what most black people seem to know or not know, is that we know that the Mormons had some problem with race. We're not exactly sure what it was. If you ask many blacks, they'll say that even to this day, blacks aren't allowed to join. But we know that there was something going on. But remember, at the time that we probably had heard about this was almost most churches. I mean, the Mormons were just late, but it wasn't a new thing for black people not to be allowed to go to some church. So people didn't think that Mormons were, particularly racist, but you certainly were on the racist side of the scale.
It's kind of like, who wasn't racist? If you're gonna look for a church, they will have all had a racist past.
Absolutely, that's basically right. That's basically the way to look at it. And remember, my wife has been in whiteness longer than I have, and really ensconced in it. And so she's not really that worried about that aspect. And all the other stuff you talk about, the community, the sisterhood, I mean, that's really working.
Now, there are historically black churches. What kept you from considering maybe one of those? I guess Mesa probably doesn't have a lot of them.
Precisely. We have in round numbers, we have approximately 0 AME churches. And remember, she's also not a big church person, right? So, the only way, she was raised in black churches that she'd been dragged to more than I had. And so she's really, I've got to find something totally different here. And this is totally different. And in fairness, there was something even to this day, that I still think is wonderful about it, is it's the sense of community. You know, that's just a unique thing where it does not happen elsewhere. I should say it happens in other places, but not as consistently in Mormonism, where, you know, she now had, you know, 50 new best friends, people who she could call. I'm on the road a lot. You know, she got a flat tire. For example, she gets a flat, not a flat, her car. She has a problem with her car one day, it doesn't start or whatever. She posted on Facebook, ha ha ha, I'm stuck out here. The sisters in the ward, right? You know, 4 of them offer to come by. One lady says, hey, why don't you, I'll bring you back to my house and you just take my Land Rover, and whenever you get your car back, you can bring this car back.
Wow, that's
Yeah, that kind of thing,
amazing.
right? Yeah, and so we have friends, by the way, we have not just friends, but rich friends, which is always the best kind of friends to get if you can choose. And so it is, you know, absolutely wonderful to have that sense of community. She's stuck here by herself with these 4 boys a lot of times, and now she has, you know, 50 best friends. It's hard. I mean, that's a really good sale. And so, but she's more agnostic about the true church stuff.
Okay, yeah, she just likes the community
Absolutely,
mostly.
right? You know, and you know, and so she's not like, I'm coming home and bringing these things to her, and she's kind of like, you know what, that's between, you know, my name is Paul, that's between y'all. I'm not worried about that. You know,
Okay.
it's a nice place to be. You know, stop causing trouble.
And you didn't necessarily believe in the truth claims either, it sounds like.
Oh no, 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 no. I don't know if I told you this, but I was what, 43 at the time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you can't convince a 43-year-old black man that, oh, I don't know, that let's say that the Native Americans are really Jews who God turned black because he got mad at them. It's hard to convince a 43-year-old black man of that. Really, really is hard.
But how does that not keep you out of the church? Why didn't you just like, oh my gosh, this Book of Mormon's racist. Oh, they've got this racist past. No way I'm joining this thing. Is that just because you figured all churches were racist, so you can't really?
Yeah, well, exactly. And here's the thing about it is that all I know about is the past, right? I know about the priesthood band, etc. And I know Mormons are late to that process.
Right. Right.
The Book of Mormon in and of itself, for instance, when I started trying to read that, and I never made it past 1 Nephi, when I got to the, you know, that the ancient Jews were white and had to be turned dark, I kind of was like, okay, all right, you know, Joseph had fun with this. But for me, it wasn't so much about the matter of truth. And here's why: is because I lie for a living. And what I mean that is that I tell stories that are always exaggerated. They didn't happen in the order that they happened, etc. And I tell people the lie I tell you is better than the truth, because I
Hmm.
can make a message that's more truthful and impactful by rearranging the facts than I could ever do by telling you the boring truth. People won't pay me to come hear about the truth. The truth is boring. We live that. And so the idea that something has to be factually true to be useful is not in my vocabulary. I don't get that concept. So the fact that, you know, this didn't happen, and, you know, we didn't, first vision, it has 4 different versions, etc. I'm not that worried about that. I
Now,
know
what
that.
about what about lying to get gain or to hurt other people?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that would be wrong. You know, I do think though that there is that part of, you know, you being lied to, how to say this, part of the responsibility is on the hearer to be an adult about it. And so I'll give you an example. I never stand up before a group and say, hey, I'm going to talk to you today and tell you a bunch of stories. None of them happened in the order that I'm telling you them. Mostly the facts were changed. I've conflated people and put them together for the purpose of making the story interesting and shorter. And I want you to know that right up front so that you don't think this is literally true. That would ruin the entire thing. It'd be like going to a magician and having them say, now, none of this is really true. This is all smoke and mirrors. My job is not to do that. My job is to tell you that. As an adult, your job is to know that I didn't run into 3 rabbis and a penguin in a bar. That's your job. I kind of think of it when the church. It's like I never, so if I'm hearing the milk stripping story, I'm never offended that story didn't actually happen that way, because I would tell a story like that all the time. It's his job to tell me a story that I can remember that will have an impact and a lesson for me. And whether it happened in that order or not, as an
Interesting.
adult, I'm responsible for knowing, because the magician, remember, doesn't tell you. How do you know that David Copperfield isn't real? Because you're a grown man and you figured that out.
Were you about to say grown ass man?
I was about to say grown ass man. And that is, by the way, my favorite expression. And so I think, you know, as a grown ass man, that is your job to know that. And so those things never offended me as much. You know, the fact that, you know, some of the narratives of the church, and also, by the way, every church right, does that with their narrative. All right,
Right.
nobody has a founding narrative that says, "Oh yeah," and then by the way, our leader slept with a few people and got drunk a lot. And, that's not the part of the story you tell. So the fact that you don't tell those parts about Joseph never bothered me at all.
Okay. So you and your wife both joined the church as highly educated, non-literal, very pragmatic participants.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I, like I said, I think my wife liked this sense of community, which is great. I had a lot of respect for, and still do, for the Mormons I met, and that they were something that at the time I wanted to be, and that is nice. And here's what I mean by this: is that there was a time where I had Mormondar, where I could almost pick out another saint. Just from my dentist. I went to the dentist, and just the time in the chair, and you remember, now this is a guy who's usually nice to you because they're trying to sell you several $1,000s worth of dental treatments. They're not going to be a jerk about it. But the guy was so nice, I went back and immediately Googled him, and I'm like, yep, BYU. I could tell, just that kind of. And I remember my first testimony meeting standing up and saying, I don't know if everything that we believe is right, but here's what I know: I'd rather be wrong and be like you than be right and stay as I am.
Uh,
And so I was looking from a standpoint of, I like to get this kindness, this generosity, that on the surface, at least, I saw often that I don't have. And
you
I
wanted to be kinder. You wanted to be a kinder
exactly.
person.
I wanted to be exactly. Um, all the kindness and half the racism. Uh, and so that was my thought. And so we did the traditional path. We ended up getting we went through our probationary period. And remember, we started out as like level 4 Mormons. All right. And we remember it's just two of us. We've been married since we were young people. We have 4 kids. It's not like I had to scrape off the tattoos, right, and go to rehab. I mean, we were pretty much there already. It was pretty easy to become Mormon. We get endowed, so we can go to the temple. And so I get a whole new set of underwear. And I don't understand why you guys don't talk about that more. That to me was the biggest drawback. It took us about a year and a half to really get temple ready. And that's because they kept bugging us, because I wasn't excited about it. It took me years to really find. I don't know if you found it out since you left the church. It took me years to find the boxer brief. I mean, the boxer brief is a really nice thing, and now I've got to trade it for long johns and t-shirts all year round. Even in and the summer. And I don't want to do this. And here's the thing that is kind of different from as an African American. One of, by the way, the biggest things about it to me was one of the hardships of being temple endowed to me was the fact that someone would be picking out my underwear. As an African American man, that is huge. And let me tell you why. Because when I was growing up, whenever I would get impressed with someone in Compton, maybe there was a young guy who we suspected was dealing drugs, he'd have a car and lots of girlfriends. My father would always remind me, hey, I know you think Ray Ray's pretty cool, but in 2 years, somebody would be picking out his underwear for him.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what they do in prison, right? They stamp their name, property of, on your underwear. The biggest degradation that I could see growing up was having someone pick out your underwear for you. And now I go to a church, and the first thing they say is, your reward for righteousness is we will pick out your underwear for you, property of the LDS Church, right?
And you got to buy it from us. It's like a company store.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
It's like the company store.
Which I have to admit, though, they're pretty cheap, though. Now that you're shopping at Kohl's like the rest of us, it was a good deal. It was a pretty good deal for the Mormon to wear. And so I would put these things on, and everyone thinks I put them on, and I say my covenants, and I would be like, I have paid. And like I say, I'm paying 10% of my income to be told what to wear, right, at that fundamental level. And so that was already, chafing me, so to speak. It was the idea that, and I think I had a different perspective. I think, I asked, they let me teach elders forum, which was a mistake, I think, all the way around. And one of the times I asked, I was like, how in the world do you guys deal with this? And that perspective was like, what do you mean? It never even occurred to them. And it makes sense, that they wouldn't think that, okay, the fact that you have garments is somehow, a degradation that, it's picked out for you. You grew up with it. It makes sense. But for me, that was, definitely something that was hard to get through.
Got it.
Fortunately, I didn't have to live with that long.
How'd you get over that? How'd you get over
Well,
the garment thing?
that was simple. I lost my temple recommend, um, and that's when sort of I guess the activism started. Now let me tell you. In the meantime, one of the things that I'm having trouble with immediately with the church.
Okay, wait. Before you talk about that,
Right.
what were there good things that you and your wife
Oh,
experienced that tell us
a
about the
thousand.
good, tell us about the good that you experienced as an active Mormon.
A thousand things. Like I said, that sense of community. And by the way, let me tell you, we're the only African American family, at least that I'm aware of, in our entire state, and
Wow.
Tokenism has its privileges. So we get to speak at state conference, right? The first year we joined, like 2 months later, we're speaking at state conference.
Did
Um,
you say tokenism has its
has its
privileges?
privileges, and we're famous. We're very famous because, in matter of fact, it's troublesomely famous because everybody in the state knows us. I can't tell you white people apart. I really have no idea. And so everywhere I go, I know that there are people who might know me that I don't know them. I can't go, sneak. I can't go sneak and grab, a crack pipe if I like to. And I don't normally do that. I mean, it leaves a bad aftertaste. But I don't normally do the crack. But I can't, I couldn't even go, have a beer because there's some Mormon somewhere. But I got tons of. Let me give you an example of one of the perks I had. So I get to go back to BYU, and now I'm a member. And they say, hey, have you come speak again? And I said, okay, I'll speak. Now, I can't charge the church money. That's kind of bad. But I said, fine. But I want tickets to the Utah football game. That's the weekend we're going to do it. And so I don't just get tickets. I sit in the president's box. And so I found out with my best friend, D-Money, Dieter Uchtdorf, I get to meet President Uchtdorf. Now, you know the kind of bragging rights you have at Elders Forum when you come back, right? These guys at 40 and 50 generations, right? First off, first Mormons ever, they don't get to meet apostles like me, right? And so you get like all those kind of cool things, like let me teach Elders Forum, right? And being a newbie, and here's the thing is, there's a little benevolent, let's just say, wooing tribute to race. Let's just say it's a benevolent non-Mormonism, where people think, hey, you don't really understand how Mormonism works, so we'll give you a little grace to do things that would be unorthodox, right? So I'm teaching, a lesson in Elders Quorum on celestial marriage, and so I start out with the question is, have you really thought this out? This is one woman forever. That's not a long time. Our Prince taught us that forever. All right. Do you realize how that you met someone and you dated for 3 weeks after your 2-year mission, and that is forever, ever? Why don't you just say, hey, we'll make it to life, and then Nefertiti's out there. I don't know if she's married, right? Halle Berry will be on her 25th husband by then. You might want to upgrade. Why would you want to do forever? And now normally that's sacrilegious. You might get your calling taken away. But they're like, oh, Sean doesn't know any better. He's silly, right? We'll let him get away with stuff. And they let me talk at what I call open mic Sunday. I said, how could I not like that part of the church? Now, the thing about it is that the kindness that I was looking for, I found out, doesn't necessarily come through the church's teachings, or I think it just comes from the general milieu of being raised in this community. So I can't become any more Mormon than I could be a Hasidic Jew at 43. I'll give you an example. I'm coming out of the church parking lot. I'm going into the church parking lot to take my one of my sons, one of the short ones, to Boy Scouts. We're late because we're Black and Mormon. So we're late. We're coming in and running in there. There's a sister who is taking a bunch of stuff out of her car. I don't see her. I'm going into the church. But then as I come out of the church, I run into one of the other brothers. He's driving by in his truck. He sees me, he says, hey, Brother Carter, how you doing? We shake hands. Then all of a sudden he pulls his car into the truck in, sees this woman, and says, I got to immediately go help her, and starts helping her with all her stuff in. And it bothered me because it never even occurred to me. All right. Not because I saw her and I didn't like her, or it's not like she had a Trump bumper sticker or anything. I just, that kind of general, kind of, putting up the chairs and the kind of things you do normally as an act of kindness. It just, it's not the culture I was raised in. So, and it wasn't sticking. So I'm like, man, I've been in this church for 2 years and I'm still missing stuff like that, simple service, because I'm just, not, trained that way. But, my wife, is loving it. Like I said, she's got all these best friends. People are doing nice things. She's getting an opportunity to serve. Everything is going well. Now we're getting a little, pushback from friends and family. So whenever if you're a Black Mormon, if you tell another Black person you're a Mormon, the first question I'll ask you is, wow.
Are you crazy?
What they said, did they let Black people join? Like when my aunt asked me that, that was her only question. She didn't know anything about Joseph Smith. All she wanted to know is, she didn't ask me like, do you get multiple wives? It was just like, that's the second question usually, but it's like, would you let Black people join? Or why did you join that racist church? And then you have to explain your Blackness, right? You say, no, look, I've been Black for 43 years, right? I haven't listened to heavy metal since 1983. You have to give your whole Black resume, right? I went to Ludacris concert. You have to really give your whole Black resume. And, I voted Democrat every time, since Clinton, right? You have to really give your bona fides to keep Blackness. It's like being a Black Republican, except your family will eventually forgive you for being a Black Mormon. We're not going to forgive Republicans. But my mother was kind of like, look, all right, it's not my tradition, but if you get Jesus somewhere, as long as you get your Jesus on, I'm good. My father is agnostic, but he is shockingly supportive of Mormonism. So he's my sounding board. I'd come to him with the stuff I learned from you. And my father, I'd come to him like, what kind of stuff, the crazy stuff they believe? And my father is hilarious because he's agnostic. And so he tells me one day, he says, Sean, you realize what you're coming to me to say is you're convinced that Superman can beat up Spider-Man. And you're mad at them because they think Spider-Man can beat up Superman. But you realize I think both of you are crazy. Right? But he liked the idea of the church and the community. I think he also liked all these rich white people. So he's like, just go with the rich white people and just, you might need to borrow some money someday. Just, be with a good community of people. And so he's supportive. But we're getting, these pushback, and then you start having, little cracks in your racial shelf, right? That start to build, that happen, and then I get radicalized.
Okay, let's have that be part 2 of our interview. But just to summarize, how many years were you and your wife sort of active, committed Mormons?
I would never say we were active committed, but let's say, for instance, we were, going regularly attending, right, and relying on our TR, our triple recommend interview.
Wait, what were you lying about?
Oh, what didn't we lie about? I think all the things that the rest of you do. Let's see.
So alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Like alcohol.
You would drink an occasional beer or whatever.
Exactly. Exactly, and not that often, but occasionally. I gave it up for like 6 months at one point, and then it became the kind of thing where I was sitting at a professional thing, and I was like, Sean, you're a grown ass man. You gotta let another old white man tell you when your family went through all this and slavery and hardship, so the white man can tell you can't have, right, a rum and coke, that kind of thing, right? And so there was always exactly. Think about it. Are you honest in all your business dealings? Well, consider I make a living telling lies. I guess I'm honest for the most part. I probably shaded the truth from time to time. So but back we were compliant enough, right?
Okay.
So we weren't doing crazy stuff, and so we're like, okay, this is good enough. And probably about 3 years. I had a triple recommend for maybe 2 years or so. We went though pretty regularly until about the beginning of 2016, middle of 2016. Okay. I think when Trump won the primary, we stopped.
So as you and your wife were having this experience in Mormonism, years 2 and years 3, were you like, man, I'm really loving this? Were you both like, this is great? Or were you just like, it's not working? Like, how were you experiencing it before things started to crumble?
Here's how we were experiencing it is that, I think she was getting a little less enamored with the friendship in the church because, as you get those, that wonderful camaraderie, but you need to still every once in a while, affirm it with your testimony, right? You need to every once in a while, just in this casual conversation, say, the Lord is good. You need to be part of the tribe, to not make any waves. You need to not be married to me, because I'm always going to be, somewhat on the outside pushing, saying something provocative. And so, it's starting to spoil a little bit. It's getting progressively, less fun. I'm probably going more often than she is. And
Okay.
also, but fairness, so the challenge we always had is that, by the way, I didn't mention we have 4 sons, but 2 of our sons are autistic, fairly, and I mean, good autistic. I mean, but not, Rain Man good autistic. But I mean, but nonverbal, lower functioning. So I'm not sure we ever went to church together. She might go one Sunday, might go, or I might do one part of the Sunday and she did one part. We'd stay home with one of the kids. Every once in a while we'd bring them, but then she'd have to spend the whole time in the nursing room, or someone would spend time in the hallway running around with chasing one of the kids. So we never were like, all 6 of us in the seats every Sunday anyway.
Got it.
And so I probably start going more, and then Brendan, who was a neurotypical child, he what is it? Oh, he got priesthood. Right, you're 12 years old, you get your pack of deodorant and a priesthood, and so now he has a priesthood. So he's now doing the
Sacrament. Yeah.
Right, so now I'm getting in there early, etc. And but then it started becoming like more of a burden. It's like, oh my God, Sunday, we flip a coin. Who's got to take him early to, sit through sacrament, right? And have a place for him to sit when he comes back from sacrament. So one of us got to be there. And so we were losing that love and feeling.
Okay. Were your kids loving church or not, or the ones
No.
who?
And so, for instance, the two kids who would be able to decide, the oldest son is 23. We were 16. He was 16. He's 23 now. He was 16 when we joined, I think. I'm doing the math wrong. Maybe 8. But anyway, he was almost an adult when we joined. And so we didn't bother him. He said, you know what? You figure this out. Do what you want to do. We're not going to make you join. So we never made him join, and he wasn't really that interested because he's years old and he's got good sense. All right. Think about it. You're not going to ever convince an 18-year-old that this is the thing you need to join. All right. It happens, but I don't know how. Think about it. He's going to go to college. That's not the team he's going to join for college. And then my 7-year-old son at the time, he doesn't get a choice. So he gets baptized when he's 8.
Okay. Got it.
Right. And then he gets, so we have one kid who's in the church, and he said he liked it because he knows how to play me. But if I said, oh, we're going to miss it this Sunday, he'd be like, yeah, I think we should miss it this Sunday. We'll go next Sunday. And if I asked him today, he would say, oh, yeah, next Sunday. He hadn't been in 28 Sundays, but next Sunday is the Sunday he's going to go every Sunday.
He's a smart kid. Okay, last question before we end this episode and start the next one. How did you, before your shelf started cracking and breaking, did you experience what you perceived to be racism or mistreatment in the church? Or this white supremacy that you're going to talk about?
Exactly. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about it, I think, in that context. First of all, I never had a negative. No one called me a bad word. No one came to me and said, I really don't like your people. I'll give an example. Before I joined the church, I remember being in Utah once, and I gave a presentation. And as you imagine, it was wonderful. And afterwards, an old elderly white lady came to me and says, you know what? You are a credit to your race. Exactly. And by the way, I know she meant it as a compliment. So I took it as one, but I really wanted to ask her, what do you think of my race? Because I basically just came up and told you a bunch of jokes and stories where I was the villain in half of them. What do you think of black people? Like, we produce Frederick Douglass and Dr. King. You think that I'm a credit to this tradition? So I told you an hour of jokes, and didn't use profanity, but maybe twice. And so, I could see that kind of subtle thing, but that's not, by the way, I could hear that in Alabama, right? Yeah. Southern Baptist. And so I didn't figure anything that was particularly, Mormon racy.
Sure. Just microaggressions, as they call them.
There you go. Exactly.
All right. So for those of you listening, don't worry. We're just going to end and immediately re-begin. But what I like to do is just have a clean end and a clean beginning to the multiple parts. So I just want to thank those who are checking us out through audio after we've done this live recording. Thanks for joining us. And join us in just a second for part 2 of my interview with humorist Sean Carter as he discusses how white supremacy led him and his wife out of Mormonism.